one thing that Justice Ginsburg taught me is that you stand up and fight for what you believe, but you try to do it in a way that brings others along.
Welcome to Taking Care of Lady Business, where we get real about what it takes to succeed, whether it's in business, life, or both. I'm talking to game-changing and visionary women who've broken barriers, built empires, and redefined success on their own terms. They'll share their strategies, secrets, and the no BS advice you need to rise to the top. I'm your host, Jennifer Justice, also known as JJ. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Taking Care of Lady Business. I'm Jennifer Justice. Today, we have Lisa Beattie Frelinghuysen. Did I say that right?
Yes.
I mean, when you see how long that last name is, you will understand why I had to say that. Lisa is a senior advisor to Banyan Global. Is that right?
That's right.
Look at me, 2 for 2. And she's a founder of ClutchKit, which is really where we're going to get into that as well. Lisa, thanks so much for showing up today. How are you?
I'm good, Jennifer. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. Lisa has an extremely interesting background, dealing in all different areas. We have reproductive health, we have, finance, and we also have 3 words that every woman loves to hear or name, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so... and she worked with her. So we're going to get into all of it right now. So again, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show today. Let's just go back a little bit of like how you started in your career, where it all started.
Sure. So I, after graduating undergrad, I worked at the ACLU in women's rights and reproductive freedom, it was called then. I love that job. And it got me sort of started in the gender equality, reproductive justice space, went to law school at Stanford, ran the Stanford Law Review there, was very interested in writing about women's health and the inequities in both research and treatment there. And then ended up clerking both on the DC Circuit Court of Appeals and then for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. And I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work on the court's really last landmark gender equality decision. It was called the United States versus Virginia, and it involved whether or not women could attend VMI, Virginia Military Institute, which had been formerly all male, under the Equal Protection Clause. And so I worked on that with her. She got a huge majority in that case, which was super exciting. The one lone dissenter was her best friend, Justice Scalia.
Friend.
Her very, very close colleague. I mean, they did a lot together. And it was back in the old days where people who were on different sides of the political spectrum with very different constitutional interpretations could really be good friends. They shared a good sense of humor, love of opera. They had a lot of fun together. But he did dissent in one of her most important decisions. So I worked with her. I worked in a law firm for a while. I took some time off when I was having my 4 kids, but got involved in Planned Parenthood. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood for about 18 years, something like that, 18, 19 years, which I loved. Very much of a roll up your sleeves board. We got involved in everything. And then I went to work for a privately held company overseeing legal and strategy, which was wonderful. I really wanted to learn how one grew a business. And while I was there, I hired a firm called Banyan Global they advise the owners of very large privately held companies to advise us on succession planning. And while I was working with them, I really enjoyed it. And then they asked me to join their team. So I've been working with Banyan Global for the last several years, advising the owners on ownership, on governance, succession planning, board development, things like that. But meanwhile, I started a company that is very near and dear to my heart, called ClutchKit. And that we started after the Dobbs decision came down, the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe and Casey. I started that with two other friends. And the idea there was, to really focus on providing women the reproductive health tools that they needed, despite what was happening in the government. And we decided to really focus on the prevention of unintended pregnancies. So our country has the highest rate of unintended pregnancies of any industrialized nation by a lot. I mean, almost 50% of the pregnancies in our country are unintended and unwanted. And we thought if we could provide women and men, but especially women, the tools to prevent those unintended pregnancies, we could do a lot of good, especially in the very contentious world of reproductive health.
Yeah. I mean, my God, what a career. It's so crazy. I mean, we have to go back. Let's put a pin in ClutchKit for now, right?
Okay.
But let's go back where it started. Like, did you know you wanted to go into like pro bono work in the ACLU? Like, what was that spark?
The ACLU, I'd always been interested in social justice issues, but particularly gender equality issues. And
do you know why? Because I was the same, but do you know why that was?
It's a really good question. I mean, I did attend an all girls school growing up. And I participated in a number of letter writing campaigns around reproductive rights and things like that when I was really young. So I always had an interest in it. And when I was in college, I think I got more interested in it. And then this job opened up it was called the Public Education Department at the national office of the ACLU. And I applied for it and got it and just got to write a lot about these types of issues. And there was so much interesting stuff going on in reproductive health at the time that I loved it. And I think I knew that I would always do something in that space, regardless of if I took another job in a more traditional or corporate environment, that I would always be committed to gender equality. And, I see reproductive justice as being part of gender equality.
Yeah, for sure.
That women will never
yourself, your body, your decisions, like
exactly. I mean, it's self-evident to most of us, but women will never achieve equality without having the ability to make decisions about whether and when to have children. So,
exactly. Yeah. Wow. And then after that, you decided, okay, now I really have to go to law school to really see this through. Go to Stanford, an amazing law school, of course.
I was lucky.
And then you decide to do the more noble, like legal path and clerk, where I was like, I'm going to make some money. My then boyfriend, he was like, I'm going to clerk as well. And like seconds later, I was like, how much do you get paid for that? I was like, no way.
Not much.
Oh, I mean, it's amazing. But then, so explain what clerking is to people who don't understand.
Sure. When you clerk on the Supreme Court, you clerks largely do four things. As you know, the Supreme Court, you don't have a right to have your case heard by the Supreme Court. You have to file a petition for cert. And the first thing that the clerks do is they review all of the cert petitions that come in, write a memo to all 9 justices about which cases they think the court should deny cert and which cases the court should take. And that's a sort of an interesting question. It doesn't have to do with whether the case below was right or wrong, but rather whether the case is ripe for review, whether there's a circuit split. And, sometimes if the Solicitor General has weighed in, you might be more interested in the case. So you do the cert work. The court gets about 8,000 cert petitions a year, or it did then, and the court would take only about 80 cases a year. So you're really whittling down to the most important matters of federal and constitutional law.
Every Supreme Court justice has a clerk, right? So are you basically in line with what you would like? And so then you have a whole layer of other ones with different
Yes. So the cert work, every Supreme Court justice actually has 4 clerks, and you divide those cases, those cert petitions up just because there's so many of them, and you've got to get through them relatively quickly. And you write a memo to all 9 justices. And look, they can also read the cert petitions themselves and think through it themselves if they have an interest in that case. But you're trying to help them, get to the most important cases. So that you do cert work, you do bench memos, where once the case has been granted cert and the lawyers submit their briefs, and often if it's a really big case, you've got 50 to 100 amici briefs coming in too, friend of the court briefs. The clerks read through all of those briefs. We look at the laws that have come before, the precedents, and we write a bench memo to our justices describing the basics of the case, the law, the arguments that they're making, what we would recommend in terms of how that case should be decided, or questions that they might ask at oral argument. That's the bench memo work, and you often meet with your justice to go deeper on the case. And then the most interesting piece of the Supreme Court job, of the Supreme Court clerkship, is drafting the opinions. So once the justices hear the oral arguments, and the clerks sit in the courtroom and hear that too. You hear the oral arguments. Then the 9 justices go back to a conference room where it's only the 9 justices in that conference room. And they go around the room from most senior to least senior to state their opinion of the case. And then the most senior justice in the majority will assign the opinion to who he or she thinks should write that decision. And the justice will come back to chambers, will meet with the clerk, let the clerk know what each justice said in that conference room, because it's very important to hold on to all those votes. You don't want to lose.
Is it recorded at all, or how do they? No.
But you pay attention because you want to make sure that you're sort of writing the best opinion that you possibly can. You draft the opinion, you're going back and forth with your justice. The opinion gets circulated to the majority, then it gets circulated to the dissent. The dissent writes theirs. Sometimes there's more back and forth in the opinion writing, and then it's issued to the public. And as you know, Jennifer, the biggest, sort of most controversial cases come down at the end of the court's term. And in this case, Justice Ginsburg decided to give an oral summary of the case too, because it was such a big case in the courtroom. And so that's a really, sorry?
What year was that?
That was in 1996, United States versus Virginia. VMI so did not want women to attend the school that they had set up a separate but substantially equal, in their mind, a separate but equal program for women, which, as you know, is not a term that aged well.
No.
And nor was this remotely equal. It was like this dinky little program at the Mary Baldwin School, whereas VMI had this sort of big military, training, barracks, a rat line. They had great alumni. They had 4-star generals. They had big, oppressive professors and job help, etc. So it was a very different, not equal program at all, but it was a great fact pattern to make, for the court to take. So in that case, the court found that VMI had violated the Equal Protection Clause, that they had to have what Justice Ginsburg said is they had to have an exceedingly persuasive justification. If you have a gender classification, you need an exceedingly persuasive justification for that, which they did not have. And so they said, you've got to open your doors to women who are ready and able to attend VMI. And then the fourth piece of what the clerks do, which I found very difficult, honestly, is the death work. So whenever there is an execution in our country, somebody's received capital punishment, there's often a last minute challenge to the Supreme Court asking the court to review both the guilt and penalty phase and to stay the execution. And so you're often getting these papers very late at night. You're working through large stacks of proceedings in both phases of the trial. You're calling your justice in the middle of the night to make a recommendation whether to go forward with or stay the execution. And then you stay at the courthouse until, if the court doesn't stay the execution, you remain at the courthouse until the petitioner has received the death penalty. And that was a tough part of the job. But it's an intense job. It's an amazing job, really. It was a highlight of my professional life. And I grew in the process very close to Justice Ginsburg, who had been a hero of mine, from before she was notorious RBG, had been a hero of mine. And I just felt so lucky to have the opportunity to work with her, to learn from her, and to grow close to her, to have her as a friend and mentor.
Amazing story. And obviously such a difficult position to get. So kudos obviously to you. And how long is your clerkship?
The clerkship is really just 1 year. And I'll tell just one funny story in terms of getting a Supreme Court clerkship, which, is not easy. And I was lucky. I had strong grades and good recommendations, and I was running the law review. All of that helped. I submitted some writing samples to my justice. And so she had asked me to come to her apartment at the Watergate for an interview, which I was super excited about. I showed up at her apartment. She opened the door, and I saw that she was holding my 3 writing samples in her hand, one of which had a red circle on it.
Oh my God, not the red circle.
And my heart sank, and I thought, oh my God, did I send her a writing sample with an error in it? And, after saying a quick hello, I immediately turned to the writing sample and I said, it looks like you may have found an error in my writing sample, because I couldn't quite get over it. I was, contemplating whether I should walk out now or, and she said, yes, I noticed in this, it was a piece that I'd written for the ACLU actually. So it was for a lay person, it was not a legal piece of writing. It was for the general public. And she said, I noticed you cited this case, but you didn't put per curiam in brackets, meaning that it was a disjointed opinion, several different opinions, so it didn't have the same legal weight. And I said, oh, you're right. Barely remembering the case. You're right. Yeah. That was because I was writing to a lay audience, and if I threw in some, Latin legal jargon, I was worried about losing them. And she said, okay.
Oh my God.
And then we sat down and had a great conversation, which ended, like the last hour of the interview was about reproductive justice and whether or not, as you know, Jennifer, reproductive justice was sort of grounded in this notion of privacy, which emanated from the Bill of Rights, but wasn't really mentioned in the Bill of Rights. And, there was a lot of talk at the time about whether grounding it in the equality doctrine might have been a better approach. And the justice told me about this one case that she had that most people don't know about, very early on, before Roe v. Wade. It was a case involving a woman named Susan Struck, I think, who was in the military, who had become pregnant, and the military had a rule that if you were a woman and you became pregnant, you either had to have an abortion or you had to leave the military. And the justice, she was an advocate at the time, a young advocate, brought the case saying that violates the Equal Protection Clause. You don't require the same thing of men when they may need a procedure. You don't say either you have to have this knee procedure or you leave the military. And so she said that violates the Equal Protection Clause. And, you know, it was great for her plaintiff that the military actually said, you're right, we're going to change our policy. But it was maybe not so great for our country in the sense of, had she taken that case to the Supreme Court, and this was in 1972, the year before Roe v. Wade, the court might have decided this reproductive rights case based on equal protection or equality.
Oh my God. So crazy.
I know.
We could talk for hours about this stuff.
Right. So it was a really,
she's just like small but mighty, and like, so it's such, you know, we miss her so much.
Yes.
I can't even imagine what
Yes.
she would think of everything that has happened right now.
Today.
I can't.
I do.
Anyway, so that's, yeah. So you moved on, you stayed close with her, and I know you worked with her later on, et cetera, right? Like you just stayed, not work, but
we stayed very close. I visited her all the time. I took my kids down to visit her. We went to go visit BMI years later to meet some of the first women cadets, which was really wonderful. And we just, you know, when she came up to New York, I would see her. When I went down to DC, I would always see her. We stayed really close. And then at the end, her family asked me to be an honorary pallbearer in her, you know, at her memorial service, which was a great honor for me. I got to, you know, they had the Supreme Court police carry the coffin, but I walked next to her and then stood vigil in the middle of the night. They have two clerks that stand vigil next to her coffin, and she was laid up at the top of the portico of the Supreme Court, the top of the steps of the Supreme Court. This was before she was laid in state as the first woman and the first Jew to be laid in state. But there were just hundreds, it seemed like thousands of people who were in line passing before the steps of the Supreme Court to pay their respects to people who were holding signs saying, "Thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for fighting for my rights." You know, as they passed her, it was a very moving experience. Yeah,
emotional. I feel like I'm getting emotional talking about it. I mean, she's such an important figure for women in general, you know? So then like you have this amazing, you know, clerkship and then where did you go after that?
And then I worked at a law firm doing media law, as close as I could get to constitutional law, defense side. Took some time off, but always wanted to stay involved in gender equality and reproductive rights.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Banyan, what you do there, because we were talking before about how, you know, it doesn't seem like what you're doing in finance could, you know, have this thread about gender equality. But what you're really doing is actually helping women succeed. And, you know, you say it in your words better than mine.
Sure. No, look, I feel like my career has been so sort of, you know, in public interest, in the government, in business, in consulting, in law. I've been sort of all over the map in a way, but I've really enjoyed the variety. At Banyan Global, we come in and advise just the owners, so not the board or the management room, but the owners of these very large privately held companies. My companies, the ones I work with, are multi-billion-dollar companies. And that group of owners often includes both men and women. And I do always bring a gender lens to that work to make sure that everybody's voice, everybody's vote, everybody has a seat at the table who needs a seat at the table, making sure that people are educated enough that they can make really good decisions, both strategic and financial, asset allocation decisions for the company, that the succession of who's going to lead that company next is done well, both in terms of the generation above their glide path, the next gen coming in, that they have the professional development that they need, the coaching that they need to get there, that there's a smooth transition. We often help some of these companies set up a board and think through what the decision rights of that board may be. Governance is a big piece of it. I've really enjoyed this advisory work, to be honest. It's both, it has a layer of sort of business strategy work, a layer of kind of interpersonal dynamics that I also find interesting. I like to bring people together and bring out the best in them. And then part of the reason that I do bring that gender lens to the work is I think that when people are not treated fairly, when people are not respected for arbitrary reasons like gender, it ends up being a crack that grows over time and can have a very detrimental effect on the business. And, Jennifer, as you and I have chatted, I have seen a lot of gender disparity in my work. Either siblings who are working in men and women who are working in the company who are being paid very differently. That's not commensurate with their skills,
but their brother and sister situation.
Right? Where the sister is being paid a lot less than the brother is being paid, even though she's been in the company longer. And
we've all seen Succession,
or where people are not given the same amount of voting shares, or people are told that they're that their husband, spouse can be on the board, as opposed to them having a board seat. So I've seen a lot of sort of issues around gender that are, that we've all seen and heard about. So I see and hear about it too. And I try to help these business owners get to the right place, to do the right thing. And it's honestly, I believe that it's best for the business.
I can see, you're very thoughtful in your words and your choice of words. Like I'm more of a bulldozer, and I can imagine that the way that you say it, I just would love to be in the room when you're talking to them, basically like, look, I'd be like, you're paying your daughter a lot less than your son. There's no way you think your son is smarter than your daughter. Okay. Like, so stop. Like, like how do you do this in such a diplomatic way that you can get to this point? I mean, I don't know if you can tell us anything, but yeah.
No, I mean, look, I think if I can help the decision makers get there on their own, and in terms of playing into their own interests and their interests and the longevity of their, these businesses that they have founded and have grown either organically or through acquisition, they are very invested in those businesses continuing to thrive. And if I can make the point that it will help that in the long run, especially, when you start going down to the next generation. I mean, my kids' generation has no tolerance for gender disparities. So I think it's really smart business planning. I also think, it's been amazing to me to watch some of the women who were sort of left out of the system come into the system to be educated and to be treated with respect, to watch what they bring to the system. And it's profound. And everything from an outside pair of eyes saying, hold on a second, these 3 businesses have been losing us money for the last 5 years. Maybe it's time to let them go. Whereas the one who's in the business might be very attached to those businesses, or, coming up with really having a great sense of judgment that stays up here and doesn't get down into the weeds. And so they're able to say, hold on, that's not a priority. Let's stay up here and focus on our owner level decisions that we need. Or they may have very good, advice for so much of business, as is dealing with your top talent. They may have great advice in terms of how to handle different talent issues and talent matters or culture. It's really exciting to see when that voice comes into the system and starts to really contribute to good owner level decisions. So I get kind of fired up by it, but it is often a bumpy journey, Jennifer.
Yeah. I can imagine. You seem to have the patience for it. I don't know if I would, but yeah. Well, speaking of other things that fire you up, let's talk more about ClutchKit.
Okay.
You told us why you started it, when you started with friends. Like, tell us exactly what is in a ClutchKit.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is what the ClutchKit looks like. And
it's like a doll kit if you're not watching this.
Exactly. It's a cute little canvas bag with a green zipper, green as a nod to the green wave, which is the reproductive rights movement in Central and South America, predominantly Catholic countries that have been making great gains there. In the ClutchKit are a tin of condoms, emergency contraception or the morning after pill, and pregnancy tests, and some good information. I want to pause for a minute just on emergency contraception and the morning after pill, because many women my age did not grow up with a morning after pill and don't really know the difference between abortion medication and the morning after pill. So if you'll allow me, I'm just going to spell it out.
Sure, yeah.
Abortion medication terminates an existing pregnancy. So you have to be already pregnant, and it terminates that pregnancy. The morning after pill, emergency contraception, prevents a pregnancy, and it does so by delaying ovulation. So there's never a fertilized egg. It delays ovulation. It prevents a pregnancy from ever occurring. And it's profoundly effective. It is more effective the sooner after unprotected sex, the sooner it's taken after unprotected sex. And Jennifer, again, just to put a fine point on things, unprotected sex might include when participants fail to use contraception. It might include a contraceptive failure, when something breaks or otherwise fails. And it also includes situations of rape or incest when no contraception was used. So having this ClutchKit in your bedroom, in your dorm room, is a great practice, because you have the tools when you need them. When we started to sort of research whether this was important, we realized that there's so many accessibility barriers to getting emergency contraception in the morning after pill. There are some 8,000 zip codes in our country that are considered contraceptive deserts, where you cannot find these tools. It might be hard for young people to go to CVS, to get there, to have the courage to ask for this medication. They might be afraid of seeing their parents or their parents' friends there. They might have to ask a pharmacist to, unlock the cabinet. It's challenging. There's a lot of stigma around it, and it's challenging for young people. That the dominant brand of the morning after pill, costs between $50 and $60. So it's cost prohibitive for some people. So for us, we felt it was really important to have these tools so that more women could prevent all of those unintended, unwanted pregnancies I spoke to at the beginning of the podcast.
And tell me, what was that statistic again? What the U.S. has, how many more
the
percent?
highest rate of unintended pregnancies of any industrialized nation. And, it accounts for something like 48 to 52% of all pregnancies. And it's for a variety of reasons. It's for, we don't have great sex education in schools. These tools are not readily available. There's a lot of controversy in our country around reproductive rights and reproductive health, and there's a lot of misinformation out there, stigma. It's for a country as wealthy as we are, it's sad that we, as wealthy and as kind of enlightened as we are, it's sad that we don't make these tools more accessible as part of basic healthcare. And Jennifer, I don't know if I told you this, but the idea for this is really not my idea. And I like to credit the person who came up with this idea. It was a little bit different when she did, but it was the night of Trump's first inauguration. Mm-hmm. I went down to DC because, if you remember, there was a big women's rights march.
I was there.
Yes, you were there too. In DC or in New York? Were you?
In DC.
In DC. Yeah. So
I'd
taken all my kids down, my 4 kids, and my mother to go march with us in this great women's rights march in DC. And the night before the march, I had invited Justice Ginsburg and Gloria Steinem, the two sort of.
Of course. I mean, I invite them all the time for a coffee.
I know. It sounds a bit like I'm name dropping, and I certainly don't mean to, but I do just want to sort of tell you about this dinner, because it was such a meaningful dinner that I hold close to my heart, to see the two of them who were so different in their approaches. Gloria Steinem out there protesting, writing, marching, speaking, Justice Ginsburg quietly bringing case after case to the Supreme Court. But they each so admired the other one. To see them together that night was really fun. And Gloria had brought a number of other women to the dinner that I was hosting, one of which was an actress named Emma Watson. She plays Hermione in the Harry Potter films. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting next to her, and it's actually her idea. She said, Lisa, why don't we just come up with a kit that takes this whole issue away from the politicians, and we send every young woman who goes off to school with this kit so that they have it with them. And that night we put a lot in the kit. We had everything from, menstruation products to contraception, UTI, STD, all kinds of sexual health and reproductive tools in there. The kit was like a suitcase by the end of the discussion. But it was really her idea. And I've since written to her to let her know that I took the idea and narrowed it down to just focus on the prevention of pregnancy. But I wanted to let her know that. I haven't heard back from her because we're not really friends. But anyway, it's her idea originally. And so I had that idea in the back of my head. And then a few years later, when Dobbs came down, decided maybe this is the moment. And went walking with a good friend of mine who is in finance. And after the Dobbs decision came down, she said, what do we do now? And I said, well, I've always had this idea in my head to make these kits. And she said, we're going to do that. And literally that weekend, she pulled another woman. This is Dune Thorne, who works at Brown Advisory. She pulled another woman, Christine Currents, who runs a fashion company called Badgley Mishka. And Christine pulled the three of us together and said, let's meet and figure out how we're going to do this. So it was really thanks to those two Christine Currents and Dune Thorne, that we got this idea off the ground, launched it, and we're able to, get it into hands of women who are going off to schools.
And then, so how do women, where do they get it? Is it like a present people give them, or is it
Yes.
You partner with colleges?
Yes, no, that was actually one of their really interesting ideas about this. Why don't we make this giftable? Like, it's a cute kit that mothers, aunts, cousins, friends can give to somebody. Here's a gift I want to give you. I'm really proud of all the hard work you've done getting into your college. Take this gift and go get your dreams. Yeah. Have fun and go get your dreams, So we sold the kit. We sell it online on a website called ClutchKit.com. It turns out, Jennifer, I didn't think of this, but it turns out that there's a lot of car clutch kits out there. Yeah. From the old standard cars.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that. I named it ClutchKit because I thought both it's like a little clutch, but also in a clutch moment, you have the tools that you need.
Yeah.
So it's on a website called theclutchkit.com. And we've done really two things. So we have a website where you can buy and send these kits to people that you know and love who could use them. And then we also have a nonprofit, Jennifer, where we are distributing these kits to those women who really need them, who don't have the funds for them. We partner with organizations that might be involved in, underserved education groups or health groups or victims of domestic violence. And we've partnered with them, and they give the kits away to their clients and those in their community. We've also had a few wonderfully generous souls who have made donations and said, hey, I want to put these kits in public schools in California. Make a donation, and then we've sent these kits out there. We'll do education work with them, speaking work. We'll try to partner with young people so that they can lead the movement. And then last, Jennifer, we've tried to get into campus bookstores, and that's been a slow and bumpy road. It's not like an obvious product for campus bookstores. It's not a merchandising shirt or mug.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a gift, as you say. It's reproductive health. It's so we're in the Berkeley, Brown University. We're slowly getting in.
Of course, yeah. You start with the hippie schools, yeah.
We're slowly working our way into campus bookstores. We attended a campus bookstore expo, like a big fair down in Texas. And so we started to make some contacts, but it wasn't immediately apparent to a lot of the buyers out there.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Amazing. I mean, such amazing work, such an amazing career that you've had. This is
thank you.
Yeah, incredible, like all the work you're doing. And it does seem disjointed or fragmented, like how you did everything, but really it's like, there's a red thread through all of it. So
yes.
Totally makes sense. And I know we have to let you go, but before we do, I always ask one question, and that is, what is the worst advice you've ever received?
I think the worst advice I got was when I was thinking about starting ClutchKit. And I sought the advice of somebody I trust and love. And he said, oh, don't do that. It's dangerous. The country is in a crazy place around reproductive rights. I don't know if you might be exposing yourself and your family to backlash of some sort. And I went home and thought about that, and then thought, one thing that Justice Ginsburg taught me is that you stand up and fight for what you believe, but you try to do it in a way that brings others along. Mm-hmm. And because the ClutchKit was an example in my mind of something that was really middle ground or the common ground, that pro-life and pro-choice people should both agree that the prevention of unwanted pregnancy is a good thing. That at the end of the day, we could bring others along here. We could help sort of unite this very tense, the tension in this very controversial space, and meanwhile stand up for something that I really believe in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad you did it. I'm glad you didn't listen to that advice. How else would we get where we were if people weren't standing up, right? For what's right.
Right.
So once again, if somebody wants to find ClutchKit, how do they find it?
It's theclutchkit.com, the website, theclutchkit.com. We are also on Instagram and TikTok. Gosh, I think it's... Yes, we're also on Instagram and TikTok, and I'm not sure exactly how to direct you there, but I think it's ClutchKit _. That might be, I think that's right. But the website is the easiest place to find everything you need.
I love it. Thank you so much for being on this episode. Everything you've done, and like I said, it's so inspirational. To everyone listening, thank you for tuning into this episode of Taking Care of Lady Business. Until next time, I'm Jennifer Justice.
Thanks to MedJet for supporting the Lady Business podcast. If you're hospitalized or your security is threatened while traveling, they can get you home. I'm a MedJet member and have been for years. Everyone who travels should be. Enroll before your next trip at medjet.com. Thanks for tuning in to Taking Care of Lady Business. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and review. And also share this episode with a friend who needs that extra push to own their success. If you want more strategy stories and exclusive content, follow us on TikTok at Taking Care of Lady Business, on Instagram at thejustice.dept and Jennifer Justice L, or visit our website at thejusticedept.com. Taking Care of Lady Business is a production of Lady Business LLC.